Hello everybody and welcome to this webinar with ILX. This is in fact the third webinar that we've run within a series of four, all which are pertaining to the ITIL 4 accreditation scheme. But today we're going to be talking specifically around two of the training modules within the managing professional track, and those two modules are the create, deliver and support and the drive stakeholder value. But first of all, I'm Sally. Welcome everybody. I'm the sales director here at ILX and I'm joined by Alice. Alice sits within our marketing department, and I'm also joined by Steve. And Steve is an ILX associate. Steve has a wealth of experience. He's spent 35 years working in IT, numerous roles ranging from service manager, project manager, and also he is a trainer and a consultant. But before I hand you over to Steve, I've just got a few housekeeping bits and bobs. First of all, if we can keep questions and answers to the end, that would be much appreciated. As we go through the presentation, please do submit your questions as we go through. There is a question box that you can type your question into the right-hand side of your screen. Alice will collate those questions and we'll go through those and answer those towards the end of the session. The session is scheduled for 40 minutes. Steve will be chatting to you for a maximum of 30 minutes. So we've got 10 minutes for those questions and answers at the end. We will be recording this session, so if you have to duck out or you want to forward this recording on to any of your colleagues, we'll be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to that recording, which will be on YouTube. Please, if you can keep yourself muted throughout, that'd be much appreciated. And if you aren't already doing so, please do follow us on social media. We have profiles on each of these social platforms where we're posting lots of really good stuff, from blogs to white papers to new product launches to promotions. So it's a way of keeping in touch with ILX. And last but not least, you will be asked for some feedback after this session concludes. Very short feedback form. If you can provide us some feedback, it enables us to improve on these sessions to make sure that we're providing sessions that add value to you. That's it for me for now, so I'm going to pass you over to Steve and I'll speak to you towards the end of the session. Many thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you there, Sally. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Steve. As Sally mentioned there, I'm an ILX associate. I've worked with ILX for a number of years, and yeah, I do like working with ILX quite a lot. I've been working in the ITIL space for a number of years, and I found myself encountering ITIL alongside many other frameworks, as we'll be alluding to on the session today. Examples that we'll be giving are called to be all relevant examples and easy to search examples out there on the web. But one thing I will stress is that when we do talk about ITIL, it's never standalone. There's always something alongside ITIL that it supports, and also it can be leveraged against as well. So hopefully, next little session, I will introduce you guys to the two courses, which are CDS and DSV. CDS is Create, Deliver and Support. Now, this has also become known as the engine room course because the bulk of activity in delivering a service happens in this area of the ITIL service value chain. But we can't exclude the fact that we need to have some interaction with customers, understand the journey the customer's going on, the experiences they're seeking. So you tend to find that these two courses are actually a very good fit for each other. They're also part of the Managing Professional Transition designation. So if you do wish to acquire that, then these two courses will be part of your study path. On this session, we'll be looking at what's different between version 3 and version 4 in these two respective areas. And there is quite a bit different. There's no getting away from it. But there's also quite a lot that's similar as well. And it's always nice to have that, that connection with previous versions. As Sally's mentioned, any questions you have, any queries or any doubts regarding certain aspects of ITIL, please raise those questions and we'll answer them towards the end for you. Now, those of you who came on the foundation course last week and then the previous session, which was an overview of the exams, will have seen this mentioned to you. This is central to our understanding of how the ITIL framework works, operates and behaves, the service value system. It's a bit like, it's a bit like an onion, as I said last week. You have a number of layers. Each layer represents a component involved in delivering a service to a customer that contributes to and facilitates value creation and delivery. Everything has to have a starting point, and to the left-hand side there you see the opportunities and the demand that comes through. And that's what the Driving Stakeholder Value course is quite concerned about. Is what's triggering the need for the service in the first place. The value at the end, of course, has to be something that's co-created, not in a single direction, in both directions. And the value system will look at the component parts, namely the guiding principles, which we'll refer to later on with you. We need some direction and control, and that's what the governance offers us. But on top of that, of course, we then got the value chain. Everything feeds into the activities of delivering the service. Now, the value chain, of course, relies upon a number of practices. And what you'll see in the examples today is we do actually pick and choose, or pick and mix, shall we say, some of the practices in delivering a value stream. We don't need to use everything, but we do tend to use some things more than others. And of course, you never stand still. If you stand still, you stagnate, and you've always got to improve. Because somewhere in the future, you've got a competitor waiting, and they'll probably do it better than you. So we've always got to be aware of that. And that, of course, means there's a very strong need for metrics and KPIs and other data. Now, at the center of the value system is the value chain, and this is the focus we're going to find for these two courses. We have groups of other activities which are basically streamed together depending upon the nature of the service you're offering. As you'll see in a few moments' time, a new service is different to supporting an existing service. We call upon different practices, and the paths you take across that value chain from left to right, you could have hundreds of different value streams being created. Quick example, if you're going to have a value stream for registering a new user, that might involve you engaging with the customer to understand the needs of that new user. Do they need hardware, software, network access? And of course, you may then plan how you're going to achieve this and produce a process and a procedure whereby you design that process, that value stream, you make sure the resources are in place to facilitate that value stream, and then it goes live, and then the value is delivered. That's for a brand new user. But what if you've got a user that's based, for example, in another country, France or Italy, where they've got some very strong rules on data protection and taking data off the mainland? You may have to produce a different value stream to accommodate that particular situation. So there's no one size fits all on the value streams here, folks. They will vary depending on the nature of what it is you're offering. Now, these two courses are going to focus on the value chain. The value chain itself is 6 activities. We know it as PIDOD: plan, improve, engage, design, obtain, and deliver. And as you'll see, the first part of this little seminar here, looking at the create, deliver, and support course, is focusing on the engine room, the main activities in the middle there. Now, for those of you with a version 3 background, you'll be familiar with service operation, and that's what deliver and support is looking at. Something has gone live. Users now have problems. They need to contact somebody. They need support. But also, of course, we've got service transition, where obtain and build typically kicks in. Service design is touched on. So those 3 areas, which were the focus from version 3, the central part of that diagram in version 3, are still here in this course. But now we're looking at things in a bit more deeper way, a more relevant way than it would have been in version 3. So that's the focus of the course. So what are the key concepts? Key concepts we'll be touching on this particular course. We'll be looking at the 2 model approach of how value streams are pulled together. First of all, for new services, as I've mentioned, so registering a new user, acquiring new software and hardware, getting access for a CRM product, for example. How do we do that? We've got to create these things from scratch. So the journey that we take there to understand the value being delivered to the customer is different to the second model, which is supporting an existing service. Once the service is up and running, then we're looking at different value streams being delivered. So we need to look at both sets of models, shall we say. You've got 4 different types of organization to consider, and these are all considerations when designing that value stream. We'll talk more about these towards the end of the course, end of the session rather. There are a number of techniques involved also in managing demand, and there are often some very good reasons why you want to manage demand. It may be you've got a scarcity of resource. It may be you've got certain legislation or regulations to comply with, and that can be a constraint on demand. It could also be something as simple as pricing. And anybody here who did economics at university or at A level, you'd be well aware of the demand curve and the supply curve. How as the price increases, the supply drops off. Sorry, as the price increases, the demand drops off, but the supply increases. And how do we manage that gap between those two curves? We've also got to start looking at the organization and the way it behaves and operates around the customer. Now, those of you who heard me last week talking will have been probably sick of me saying this sentence to you. Nobody ever won an argument with a customer. I used to work in a service desk many years ago. It was one of my first jobs in IT. And you realize very quickly how important the customer is in your world. They pay your salary, they shape your job. If they go somewhere else, you're out of a job. So we've got to make sure that we're focused at all times on the needs of the customer to the point of creating value for the customer as well as ourselves. And co-creating value is the main thrust of the value argument in ITIL 4. We just need to make sure we understand that there's a limit beyond which we won't start doing things that the customer wants, but we'll do everything in our realm to achieve what they want. Workloads, backlogs, they're a major area now in most organizations. We're talking now about Scrum, we're talking about Agile, we're talking about requirements, we're talking about prioritization. And we've got loads of techniques to help you in this course. Some of these you'll be well aware of, but some of these will be quite new to you as well. The Kano model, for example. Not many people have heard of that, but this course touches upon it. And when you see it, it really is quite straightforward. Now, because there are two models, two value streams that we're looking at today, a new service and an existing service, there's a very nice six break on the practices that are called upon in each area. And if I show you the first of these diagrams here, this is the value stream for a new service. You can see there straight away on the left-hand side the practices that we're addressing here. I mean, a practice is a process, effectively, but a practice is a bit deeper than just simply a process. A process is a series of activities, and when you pull together the people who actually carry out those activities, the functions, and the documentation they refer to and the knowledge that they're creating, you've actually got something a bit deeper, a lot more involved, a lot more relevant and valuable. So they use the phrase practice, but they're not that far away from processes. But what we have here are 6 activities that are going to call upon certain practices to facilitate that value for the customer when it comes to a new service. The engagement is a major part of it. We've got to sit down and understand the requirements. First of all, who is the customer? What are they looking for? What are their markets? Who are the users they're representing? We need to get our head around exactly what the requirements are, how they're important, and which ones matter the most. We've then got to work out what's involved in delivering that service. We have to plan it. Now, the plan is purely and simply time, cost, efforts, financial resources, and so on. A bit of viability in some respects. In this example, we've made the decision to produce this service. So away we go. In design and transition, we now start documenting it. And again, on the course, we look at some of the tactics, some of the activities that you'll be involved in terms of documenting what the customer wants, getting sign off, getting approval, but also getting some freedom, some latitude to make some empowered decisions when you're delivering that service. We are moving more towards agile and DevOps type thinking on this course, and ITIL is now embracing a lot of the values that they give you. They're becoming a very good fit, all these frameworks, agile, DevOps, and ITIL. And when you start looking at the design side of things later on, you might even start seeing things like Scrum and other variations of delivery being introduced. But however you're going to design this thing, you're going to go ahead and build it at some point. And the obtain and build activity takes you through things like supplier management, maybe looking at some of the aspects of customer engagement, relationship management, nurturing things, but also making sure that what we produce is fit for purpose. And of course, that means feedback. It also means involving other departments and practices. It gets produced. It goes then into the borders of delivery and support. It can go live. And of course, when it goes live, you've now crossed that line between release management and deployment management, which are two of the practices we refer to here. In delivery and support, you've now installed it on your machine. You've now got the car, you've now bought the product. And maybe you might find that it's not quite working as well as you want, so you need to get some help and guidance. Maybe as a result of your interactions with the service desk, there may be some feedback that goes back to the people who build it to make further refinements, which then of course need to then be put into the live environment. And of course at that point, it needs to be validated that what's been delivered has worked. So the product and service journey, as you can see there, can be quite varied. I mean, I'm just talking through a generic new service here. But again, anything you have in existence may also follow a similar path. And the value, of course, gets delivered to the customer. And it's always the customer who defines value. We never tell the customer what to value. They tell us. What we can do perhaps is shape what they value. My wife used to work in sales for Mars many years ago, and she used to say that sales was about failure. But then she also said, but it's also about how well I position something in front of them. Do they see the value of what I'm giving them? And that's how it works in ITIL too. Although it's not as quick a series of fast-moving consumer good would be. But this is also something that needs to follow a similar line of thinking. So there's a new service. And of course, if it's an existing service, it's already out there. Now we've got a lot more involvement in terms of how we support it, how we deliver it. But also we're looking for feedback. And you'll see here there are different channels of communication going all the way right back to engagement. The initial engagement has delivered the service. Now the customers are consuming it, so they're giving feedback to whoever's designed it or whoever's commissioned it in the first place. And we've got to keep that feedback loop in place as well. You do get different teams sometimes involved, new delivery teams, existing teams, support teams, pulled together using different value streams, depending upon the nature of the product. But again, this course looks at these two models, looks at the practices involved in more detail, incident management, problem management, knowledge management. These are the mainstay of ITIL, and we investigate these in more depth. Other things that are considered, and again, we did mention the design of a service has to take into account a number of external factors. We're talking here about the organizational structures, and we do delve into these structures. Like a divisional structure, for example, is quite hierarchic, so the decision-making processes might be a bit more involved. So we need to consider that when designing our service. It might be we've got a flat, very modern looking structure of an organization. We may have a hybrid somewhere between the two. And then of course, we might have good old matrix management rearing its head. Don't think it's ever really been applied properly in some organizations, but it gives you the ability to embed a service into your BAU rather than having it stand out as something unique. A capability, we need to have those built around our service, supporting our service, and we need to understand them, where they are, how strong they are, maybe also how weak they are. We discover some of the concepts, some of the techniques involved in identifying these on the course, and also some of the roles that you should be considering too. The good news for you is that in the past, there's been schemes out there called Sapphire, Skills for the Information Age, and they used to give you a list of competencies expected of people in certain roles. And again, ITIL 4 has now addressed that, and it's now linking itself closely to that mapping still. You find it very, very relevant to these roles in terms of what's expected in the future, and obviously today as well. Teams. There are different ways that teams can communicate and work together. And because we're moving more towards an agile ITIL combination here, we're looking at more collaboration. So how can we improve the collaboration between our teams? How can we break down those silos that exist? And they do exist. And those silos could be language, they could be geographical, they could even be political. And I'm sure you know what I mean by that. I mean, a lot of organizations get very precious about certain aspects of knowledge. How do we flatten that? Culture. All right, how long have we got? We've only got 20 minutes. I could easily talk with you guys on this one for at least a day. Culture is something that's embedded into an organization, and it's something that doesn't change on a whisper, very quickly, on a sixpence. It's something that has to evolve. So how do you bring about a cultural change in your organization if you're offering a service? If you have customers whose culture is at odds with your teams? They often say that by getting people to change their behaviors over time will change the culture of the organization. And as one of those industrial psychologists, Peter Drucker, once says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So no matter how good your strategy is, if the culture's against it, it's not happening. So we look into how we can change and bring about some cultural observances and differences around the service offering and the teams. You've heard me say nobody ever wins an argument with the customer. So how do we keep reinforcing that message to our teams? And how do we keep that at the forefront of everything we do? Every activity, every service offering has got to take into account the value that the customer is going to perceive. And we do talk about moments of truth and touch points throughout these two courses. And we need to understand that each of these interactions that we have will give some indication of value to the customer of how useful we are to them, but also to us as well from that particular customer. Are they more hassle than they're worth? Are they long-term? Are they strategic? Or are they short-term? Take the money and run. So we need to get our heads around that and understand it. And again, there are techniques out there. Employee satisfaction is a huge area too. And we've got to make sure that the people who are in a certain role are happy in that role, because very quickly your customers will pick up on the fact that they've got dissatisfied staff members. And I'm sure at some point in our lives, we've all encountered a member of staff on a service desk or on a call, and just by the tone of voice, we can tell that they're not happy. When I used to coach people on service desks, I used to say to them, you can hear a smile. And I used to try and find ways of getting them to put a little grin across their face because you can hear it. And it's things like that that come across only if they're happy. So we need to understand how to motivate them, how to track their satisfaction, but also how to deal with things that dissatisfy them too. It's got to be a two-way street down there as well. And finally, folks, communication, the way we say things, the way we communicate, the messages. We have to make sure that they're softly communicated, but also not too restrictive either. We don't want to be having our communications used as a stick against us, but at the same time, we do want to sell ourselves and make people aware of the positives, the value of working with us. Now, these concepts and challenges, we'll investigate these on the course. Over the 3 days, it's going to be a really full-on, let's explore this, let's talk about it, and lots of discussion around these concepts. And they are quite interesting in their own right anyways. What do you get from the course? If you've got existing processes, certainly you'll be able to improve them. And if you're looking to introduce new processes, then certainly you get some ideas of things to consider, some of the gotchas. And we're always looking out for making the whole flow seamless and consistent. So again, can you automate things? We'll discuss that. But also, don't forget, you've only got a finite amount of resource to play with. And we do talk about backlogs and resource pools quite a bit on this course. So how do you manage your demand for your service so you don't get caught out? I mean, all you got to do right now, folks, is just look at the papers, vaccines. There's so much demand and so few vaccine bottles floating around by the sounds of it. How's that going to get managed? Let's not go down that road. That's a very political debate to be had in some respects. But that's the sort of thing you might have. You might have a service that actually takes off, but you don't have the resources to cope with it. How do you choke off demand? And finally, there are other things out there which might be of value to us as well. We'll touch on concepts such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, where there's loads of algorithms out there, lots of data being gathered, lots of trends being picked up that we might ordinarily overlook ourselves. My good friend DevOps is out there too, and DevOps is not an alternative to ITIL. It's a companion of ITIL, and we need to make sure we understand how continuous integration of changes and new services and continued delivery of value to the customer, how we deploy things, is addressed and considered. It's going to be a really deep course in many places, but it's also going to be a very complete person that comes off that course as well. Now, I like the look of the Create, Deliver and Support course for a number of reasons, being involved in its delivery, but also this one's quite useful too. If I was to be honest with you, I think Create, Deliver and Support might sell more, but I do think that this one needs to be considered too, because this is the one that starts off the engine room. Look at that first chunk there, demand and engage. We need to understand all the interactions that we have with the customer and consider all the different types of customer, the markets we might be dealing with and so on, and look at the customer journey. That's the big message here. We need to understand and think like a customer. What turns the customer on and what could turn them off? And what do they need? When do they need it? How much are they paying for? All this needs to be captured. And the engage activity, which you might have seen in the version 3 lifecycle phase as being service strategy more, that touches on what the customer's thinking, what their long-term aspirations are, looking at portfolio management, as well as looking at catalogs as well. And of course, you design with customers in mind, so there will be a hook from this activity into others. Value. Over the right-hand side, that's what we're producing. Now, because we're dealing with people who shape and define services, maybe their perception of value might be different to the users. They may be looking at things like profits, increased sales, possibly. So we need to make sure we understand what value means, but also ensure that whatever value is delivered is co-created. I keep coming back to that phrase, don't I? Co-creation of value. Just look at this, folks. Traditionally, providers delivered value. It's a one-sided affair, a one-dimension. For example, you want a newspaper, you go to a news store, or you go into wherever you used to go. You can't go anywhere these days, can you? But you get yourselves your product very simply, and you've got your product there, and there's no check on whether or not it's the right product for you. There's no check whether a better product could have been serviced to you, offered to you. So traditionally, the provider and the customer, it was a one-way flow. Now, it's a two-way flow, co-creation. Now, I struggled with this concept of co-creation at the very beginning, and I kind of got myself into a bit of trouble with the presenters on our session because I argued the case that, do I really care how much value my supplier is getting? Well, obviously, for some products and services, you might not. But if you want a long-term relationship with somebody, you're looking at something that's going to be more long-lasting and valuable, then maybe you should. Now, I've been working with ILX now for nearly 15 years, and I do concern myself what value they're looking for from me. I make sure that I align my services with them, but at the same time, ILX have also asked me, and what would you like to do? It's a great synergetic relationship as far as I'm concerned, and that's value co-creation at work there. So we co-create value. It's not a one-way street. Okay, so with that in mind, that's the customer journey that helps us to try and establish, well, where is the value? Now, this customer journey is the main focus of the Drive Stakeholder Value course. You'll see across the top there are 7 activities, which I'll briefly discuss with you in the next slide. Those 7 activities represent the customer journey. That's what we've got to try and understand. We start off with exploring what is it they're looking for, what marketplaces are we offering in, engaging with them through different mechanisms, and again, the various techniques out there, all the way through to value being realized for both sides of the equation, the customer and the provider. It's got to be a win-win. Now, what you see here, of course, representing that win-win is those 2 arrows floating in the middle from left to right. Now, this diagram has come from Axelos, and I have often wanted to change the color scheme that they use. And I don't know whether you guys can see this, but if you look at the customer arrow, you might see about 3/4 of the way down there, there's a dotted purple, magenta, whatever color you want to call that line. And then if you look at the line below there, the arrow below there, you've got the service provider. And again, you have a similar dotted line about 3/4 of the way up. Now, those lines are actually very significant. They're very important. And as they're that important, you'd like to think they'd make them more visible, but they haven't yet. I'm sure there's going to be some feedback where we'll change that. But the main reason I'm emphasizing these 2 lines here, folks, is because you have customers who are looking for things and some providers who are delivering things, but they're not all going to be compatible. So as you get closer and closer, there will be a small window, and they call this here the band of visibility to a degree, the lines of visibility and the band of visibility, where both the customer and the provider's needs and provisions become the same. So that little area there where you see this wavy purple, magenta, pink line, that's the interaction we have between customers and providers. And it's only going to be in certain areas. Not every aspect of your organization is going to call upon the provider, and the provider can't give the customer everything that they need. If they did, they'd probably buy or merge each other. Anyways, that's the journey we're looking at. And the 7 activities, which we're looking at here briefly, consist of these. So in the Explore activity, Explore, just bear with me 1 second, I'll just go to the previous screen there. That's the first activity for you, Explore. Both sides sit down, understand each other's relative positions. The customer in terms of, well, who's out there? What are they offering? What prices are on offer? What support is on offer? The customer will always be looking for what matters to them. But as a provider, of course, you're only going to enter a marketplace if there is value in that marketplace for you. So what are the markets? What products are on offer? Who's out there with money? These are the sort of sad things, unfortunately, that people do have to consider. When you're in a commercial environment, that's how you think. So we need to understand the different stakeholders, the different customers, the different providers, the relationships. And again, on this course, we'll investigate various techniques that will help us understand that. Once we've worked out our marketplace and the targeted areas we're going to go looking for, then we can start coming together, engaging with various stakeholders and various parties to ensure a relationship is then formed. A relationship takes time. And when we start talking about service relationships, we're talking about internal relationships as well as external relationships. And if that relationship external becomes more involved, we're talking about partnerships, and again, something more long-term. But we've also got to make sure cooperative natures are also taken into account here. There has to be a degree of win-win. And sometimes you find, as a provider, you might take a hit on something for the benefit of the customer, but then the customer recognizes you made that point, that sacrifice, we say, and they may well come back and reward you appropriately. And it's a long-term relationship then when you start working in a more cooperative way. There are loads of approaches we talk about here on the DSV course. These 7 activities get explored in some depth. The offerings. Now then, what do you offer to the customer? Well, first of all, you've got to design something around their need. And there's a very strong emphasis throughout ITIL on alignment. Alignment of your offering to the customer need, not the customer want. And now straight away, we're down the agile road. And those are the sorts of techniques which this particular course delves into. It looks at prioritization, requirements gathering, user stories, capturing user stories from various sources, and then prioritizing them around the Moscow model. Things that must be delivered, should be delivered, could be delivered, and maybe will not be delivered in this release. Things that are looking at outcomes, What represents an output? Now, we do spend a lot of time here clarifying our positioning, but also making sure that what we offer to the customer is something A, we can support, and B, we actually understand what we're talking about, and the customer does too. So our offerings have got to be aligned. So MVP is often mentioned out there as part of the offerings, minimum viable product. If you talk to people from an ITIL background, they may well say to you, oh yeah, that's the first draft of a product. You talk to somebody from an agile background, they'll say to you, right, well, that's the first grouping of requirements that facilitates maximum learning. Different concept. And again, on this course here, we make sure that when people leave, they got the same view of exactly what these terms and these concepts mean. We don't have variations because that's going to foster confusion, and we don't want that. Agreements. Now then, when we start to talk about agreement, we're going to start bringing in one of the practices, the main practices of ITIL for service level management. Not an area I've personally been involved with. I have worked with many a service level manager, and these people are all representing the customer in front of IT. So what expectations are being set with the provider? What targets are out there? What costs are involved? What remedies are involved? What penalties are involved? That's all going to be dealt with by the service level manager. So we pull together some statement through an SLA, a service level agreement, of what the service will look like. And if the customer's happy with it, they buy. Now, to deliver the service, of course, we need to make sure there are a number of supporting agreements in place as well. And that's where the good old operational level agreement, the OLA, the internal agreement. And when we have to work with third parties, we have supplier management getting involved in underpinning contracts. So that agreement, we don't just put a bit of paper in front of a customer, we put a bit of paper in front of a customer we can deliver against. And that's an important aspect. Onboarding. Well, onboarding is how you get a customer on board. And again, in this course, we investigate some of the methods and techniques that might be useful for acquiring new customers. But there's also, sadly as well, offboarding mentioned. Now, offboarding is not a negative thing. It's just something that happens. You get natural churn. I mean, I use that website, Uswitch. Every year I go on there. I mean, am I saving money? I have no idea. But I go on there to make sure that I'm getting the best deal. So I switch electricity providers, gas providers. And there are processes and practices in there that facilitates me from moving from A to B. The finance industry is exactly the same. If you move your bank account now, there's a 7-day guarantee that if you move from one bank to another bank, there'll be a seamless transfer. That's an example of onboarding and offboarding. How do you bring customers on? How do you allow customers to leave? Without penalty. You've got to bear in mind the value isn't just in terms of what they had when they were working with you, but they might also value the way in which you treated them when they go as well. So we need to go through the offboarding and onboarding routines. And again, there's so many things to consider. I'm not going to bore you with it here, folks, but we do investigate them in great detail. Co-creation of value. So there's two sides here. We provide the value and they consume it, but it's got to be both parties benefiting here. And again, there are techniques in there. I mean, I've got an example down here of something called intelligent disobedience. One of the concepts this course deals with. Intelligent disobedience, sometimes referred to as the JFDI school. You know, if you've got a customer shouting you down the phone, just do it. But that's not always the way to do it. Sometimes you've got to bear in mind that you go the extra yard for a customer because it adds value. So I often feel at home with those service desks that take my details down and contact me above and beyond what's expected of the process. And I had an example of this with Vodafone not long ago when there'd been some mix-up on my account. And I spoke with this lady and she was tenacious. She would not let go until I was happy and everything that I perceived as a problem had gone away. Now that made me feel good about Vodafone. And that's the sort of thing I'm getting at here, is that intelligent disobedience is, okay, the process says this, but I actually recognize I can do more value, more good by behaving in this way. We're not talking about being reckless, but what we do want to do, of course, is make sure that we work within certain boundaries where we deliver that value to the customer, but not at any price. And of course, that for me would have been another concept, a moment of truth, an interaction that I had between Vodafone and myself. And I came away from that thinking, well, that's left me feeling very, very positive about that organization. The moment of truth is the realization by the customer of how good or not so good the provider is. Anyways, realizing and capturing value. Okay, we've got to make sure we capture that value. Benefits realization is a big part of most projects. But we also talk here about improvement opportunities as well. If you don't improve, you stagnate. If you don't improve, you become irrelevant. If you don't improve very quickly, you'll be yesterday's news. So we need to make sure that we understand exactly what the value is that the customer is expecting, not just today, but also in the future. And of course, it's not just a question of what we're delivering to the customers, it's how we deliver it. So value gets measured from a number of different dimensions. And again, on the course, we talk this through, all the different approaches, all the different considerations. You come away with ideas and concepts buzzing in your head from these courses, but isn't that the idea behind these courses? To widen your facilities, make you more capable and more rounded as individuals. Absolutely. Anyways, what will you get from the course? Okay, first of all, the customer journey. That's the main focus, the main thrust. And we make sure you've got a good understanding of that journey and the 7 steps, the 7 activities, how important it is. We talk about the interactions with key parties. And again, we've got to keep in mind here, folks, it's not just providers and customers, but there may be other stakeholders in there as well, of a corporate or an individual nature. Even a regulator is a stakeholder. And we've got to make sure we satisfy the needs of all stakeholders. And that, of course, means identifying them as well in the first place. The co-creation, we keep emphasizing this across all 7 steps on this course. And again, is it worth stressing here that whilst we work towards the customer's objectives, it's not going to be at the expense of ourselves. And key concepts that are touched upon here quite often, actually, a touch point. I mean, could you actually define what a touch point is? I couldn't before tackling this course. I tell you what a touch point is. It's a point of interaction, a one-directional point of interaction. And you guys coming here on this webinar, the touch point for you was probably the advert. It arrived in your inbox and you thought, oh, that's a good idea. I'll sign up for that. So touch points are just one-dimensional approaches. An interaction, though, is a reciprocal 2-dimensional reaction. And again, that's where your service level managers and other relationship managers get involved. Personas and scenarios, we introduced this into this course. I mean, a persona is a grouping of requirements. So for example, okay, I'm 57. I have a certain set of requirements in my life. I like my music, I like my beer, I like my wine, I like my dog, I like my family. I've got things that matter to me. My daughter, a millennial, down the corridor here, her focus is different. And when you're looking at trying to produce a service and target certain marketplaces, personas is really helpful. And of course, scenarios, you always have to work on the best, the worst, and the expected case around those personas. It's a very useful business analysis technique. UX and CX, you can see there's 2 dimensions here that need to be considered. The important experience is the customers, but equally important is the users, because they'll have the ear of the customer. And behavioral psychology is worth looking at as well here. When we're developing any material, any e-learning material, of course, we're trying to deliver value, content, relevance. Anything that we deliver that's going to go onto a learning management system has to have some traceability. So we have to test that it works. And we call that test-driven development. But when you start talking about behavior-driven development, you're looking at something slightly different, which is what this is touching on. Excuse me. Take a service desk. In years gone by, if my screen started misbehaving, I'd call the service desk. Now let's go back a little bit smaller period of time, say 5 years, not 10 years. If my screen started misbehaving, I might go online and raise a ticket. Change your behavior there straight away. Rather than ringing up, you're now a bit more self-supporting. And of course, now let's go back a year or even less. If my screen started misbehaving, if I went to another screen, I'd then be able to go and do a search on some FAQ databases and see what's happening. So the behaviors change over time. And can we encourage changes in behavior, make customers more self-supporting? Is there value in customers actually looking after themselves? Who knows? Nobody ever wins tonight with the customer, so we've got to go with the right behavior with the customer. These fellas, they're always going to be referred to. We don't emphasize them as much on these 2 courses, but they are driving a lot of the thinking that goes into those 2 courses, focusing on value, thinking holistically. Value is a total end-to-end engagement, so thinking and working holistically introduces all the different places where value needs to be considered. Anyways, folks, the 7 principles are never going to go away, and they are embedded behaviors that we're looking for. And finally, other input areas, the 4 dimensions, they get touched upon as well. We used to call these the 4 Ps of service design: people, products, partners, and process. But what we also have to consider as well, as part of creating those services and driving stakeholder value, is there might be external factors beyond our control. You can see there PESTLE, political, environmental, economic, social, technical, legal. economic. All these factors are all beyond our control, and they're all outside the service model. But again, we talk about them on the course just to make sure we don't miss something. We don't want to have risks turning into issues upon delivery. That's very embarrassing, to say the least. Now, these two courses you'll see are actually part of the Managing Professional designation on the left-hand side there, those two magenta squares to the left-hand side of that middle block. These we call upper courses. The foundation course gives you that understanding of key terms and concepts, but then to investigate things to a level where you feel more capable, where we create the capability model in people's minds, we use these two. And as you've seen from the way the diagram was structured early on, we have a line from end to end where these two courses, from opportunities all the way through to value, a combination of create, deliver, and support, and driving stakeholder value gives you that whole flow end to end that looks at the whole customer experience. But these two courses are part of that designation. Now, next week, we're going to be talking, not next week, about 3 weeks' time, I think it is, we're going to be talking about high velocity IT and directing, planning, and improving. And those two courses also make up the MPT designation. You can see on the right-hand side, folks, there are also other courses out there. The strategic leader designation is the one that's going through a bit of change at the moment. If you get yourself into that mindset of being more directional, more strategic, then you might find that more relevant to you. The digital and IT strategy course is the one that's now, compared to the others, more involved. You have activities, case studies, you have coursework to supply, as well as passing an exam and an interview. So it's a more involved path to go down. Past those two, you become an ITIL master. And at this moment in time, we don't know yet if just passing the exams is sufficient. I'd imagine it would be, perhaps with a logbook of experiences to back up your justification for being a master. But ITIL master is quite a serious qualification, to say the least, a bit like a PhD would be in academic circles. But our two courses we just discussed here, create, deliver, and support, and drive stakeholder value, they're key pillars of the MPT designation. Okay. The exams, both exams are intermediate exams, so they'll follow this format. First of all, the closed book. So we pack your heads full of information, but we also target the areas that we like to get questions on, and your depth of understanding will be driven by the trainers and the material and the experiences. It's a closed book exam. It's a 90-minute exam with 40 questions, and that tells you that the questions aren't a walk in the park. You do get some information that needs to be digested, interpreted, and then you're presented with answers, and you've got to make a selection from there that's appropriate to the information and the interpretation of the information that you've gone through. 70% is quite a high pass mark, but this also adds credibility and rigor to the whole exam process. And I've taught these in the past in version 3, and when people achieve these pass marks, you can see in their faces, you know, they really know they've actually worked hard and they've got something well worthwhile at the end of it. When you're doing these exams, of course, you're going down the Axelos PeopleCert exam route. So you will need to provide photo ID. Make sure you're happy with that. I often redact information on my passport, which is my approach. Everyone can do that. Also, the hardware you use, it can be easier if you use your own machines, your own personal devices at home. If you're using a work machine, you might find you run into some security challenges, and that can be a bit troublesome. Anyways, but when you sign up for the exam, you'll get more information on this and the procedures, and get yourselves ready for it. Okay, folks, well, I think that's enough from me here. I'm going to pass you back to Sally now because she's got some very useful information on how to get these courses. Okay, Sally, over to you.
Thanks very much, Steve. So very quickly, before we sort of hand over to questions and answers, if you are considering undertaking any of the training courses within the ITIL 4 certification scheme, ILX have courses already readily available. You can either take them as an e-learning course or you can take them as a live virtual class. So again, you have got both options, which, you know, dependent on your learning preferences. We have got a 30% discount off all of our e-learning courses within the suite. And you can use that code on the screen to get that discount, so you can book those courses directly from our website at the ILX group. You can see at the bottom of the screen. Also, if you are interested in running any corporate training, please do get in touch with us at the contact us email address, and we'll be happy to help you. As Steve said, you know, we have got, if you're looking for the managing professional designation, we can provide all of the e-learning courses, the foundation and the upper courses to get to that designation. So again, if you have any questions around that, please do give us a call and we can, we'll help you. And then last but not least, we will be running one more webinar, one more session in a couple of weeks' time. And we will be covering the Direct, Plan and Improve and the High Velocity IT upper training courses and giving you an overview of those. So if you're interested in attending those, please do register. And that's it from us, just to say thank you very much for listening. And I will hand you over to Alice. And Alice, hopefully you have collated some questions that we can answer for our audience.
There actually aren't any questions, again, similar to last week, which I'll take as Steve, you doing your job just far too well, that no one has any questions. I'll give it.
Well, they're going to come in a flurry.
Yeah, well, I said that last week, and then a bunch more came in. So I'll give it a couple of minutes for people to ask any questions that they might have. But yeah, other than that, and my brain is having a little bit of a blank, but if you didn't mention already, then like we said, the recording for this session will be emailed to you tomorrow. So if you do suddenly come up with any questions, you can contact us, you can reply to that email and get in touch with us that way. Still no questions at the moment, so I'll just give it a couple more minutes, but if not, then we'll end the session and just take it there again. Yeah, Steve, you've just covered all bases.
That's good.
Always good to know.
I probably talk too much anyways. That's probably the downside here. I've been Irish and I've nowhere to shut up. So I do probably answer the question I'm realizing it.
Oh, here we go. Right, just as I said, a couple of questions come in. So we've got one. I'll move them over here. Someone is asking, when will the IT strategic route become available? Sorry, digital and IT strategy, I think they mean.
Yeah, so that module is in progress at the moment, and Steve, you may want to shed a little bit more light, but it's slightly different to the other upper training courses, in that I think there's about 3 or 4 assignments that need to be signed off by the training instructor before you can take the exam. So there's a little bit more entailed in it, hence the reason why that isn't available yet, but it should be available by the end of this quarter. Is there anything, Steve, that I've missed or you want to add to that?
No, not at all, Sally. Not at all, Sally. Everything you said is spot on, because it is actually a very involved course. And I think what they're trying to do as well, I mean, obviously they'll have their own strategies here, but they're trying to make it, they don't want as many ITIL masters knocking around, to be honest with you. So they want to make this one course here a lot more rigorous in its approach. But when you also think about what goes into that course, I mean, strategic thinking and working on the commercials, you probably deal with a C-class type of individual, a CEO or a COO, CIO perhaps may also be involved in that space. But also the people who go down that road, they're probably visionaries as well. You know, they're probably thinking in ways that the rest of us wouldn't. Less operational and more strategic. So it's not going to be an easy course, but the format so far, from what I've been hearing, is 4 pieces of work have to be submitted. The instructor has to mark them, and lots of feedback and discussion. And I believe a logbook is then also assembled as well as part of the accreditation. But I could be wrong on that, but I know that it's not the easy route. In fact, if there is such a thing as an easy route, the other ones offer you to get to the other designations.
Cool, thank you. On the topic of just exam logistics, someone's asked if you can use an iPad in the exams. I'm assuming you can.
Ooh, I would advise you not to, personally. I hear more bad stories. I know they produce this Exam Shield product you can download and you can run it. But when you're working with an iPad, your screen size is going to be a lot less. And you're going to find the exam format is scenario and questions, and you're going to be moving between windows on a fairly small screen. Now, if you're used to working on the iPad, then by all means do it, you know. But if you're going to be doing an exam where you're going to be hopping between windows, the bigger the surface area of that screen, the better for you as a student, because the one thing you don't want to be doing is introducing stress into the exam. It's only a personal preference, and I'm not an Apple product anyway, Apple user anyway, so you're probably asking the wrong person anyways about an iPad. But I'd avoid any tablets unless I had the screen size that was capable of supporting me moving quickly. And because you remember, the other thing you have to watch out for, 90 minutes goes quickly. And if you're having to squint and increase size of text to read something, that's taking away computation time. And you don't want to be doing that in the middle of an exam. Personal advice, I wouldn't use a tablet.
Good advice.
Yeah, I agree. We've got someone else asking, does ITIL Master have a separate exam? You might have mentioned this already. He said, if I am an ITIL managing professional and ITIL strategic leader, will I be considered for ITIL Master?
This is what we don't know, unfortunately. It's not me not knowing, it's everybody else in the ITIL world doesn't know this either. AXLOS haven't published what getting an ITIL Master entails. Obviously, passing the exams is the first thing. In ITIL 3, to become an ITIL Master, and I was an expert, well, I had a designation of expert in ITIL 3, but to become an ITIL Master, I'd have to have a logbook, interviews, they give me situations and discuss them. I'd basically have to go an extra level to get the ITIL Master qualification in version 3, and I believe something similar is lurking. I can't imagine you can go seamlessly by passing the exams into ITIL Master. They really are quite protective over this designation. As I mentioned, it's like having a PhD academically in the world of ITIL. To get there, you must know your stuff inside out and be visionary as well. And I think that's what they'll be looking for. So I honestly don't know, but I can't imagine just passing the exams will be sufficient. There's something else lurking there. If it was just a case of passing the exams, they'd have probably told us already about it now. So the fact they haven't mentioned it means that something is coming probably.
Cool, thank you, Steve. And it seems like the last question for the time being. If you already have 8 ITIL version 3 credits, what's the best route for getting into ITIL for managing professional?
Yeah, well, first of all, this is a personal answer, not an ILX or AXLOS answer. But if you've got 8 points, you've probably passed the foundation and you've probably passed 2 life cycle courses. Or maybe you've passed 2 of the capability courses, but either way, you've passed 2 out of a bigger range of exams. Now, you've got to ask yourselves, if you're paying for it yourself, do you want to go down the ITIL 3 road still and pass those and then do the MPT qualification at the end? So you'll be learning stuff that's not current, but it might be an easier path to put you in an ITIL MPT transition module position. So it's your own view on that one. If you were going to do it from scratch, I'd say just go down these 4 paths here. ITIL specialists courses and then the strategist DPI, just doing those 4. So do the ones that do those 4 and then that should see you through. It's a tricky one, to be honest with you. I personally would rather go down this road here from scratch because you get a lot more concepts added in. It's relevant, it's new, and also as well, it's quicker as well. If you're going to go down the ITIL 3 road and then do the MPT, it's going to take you a while. Whereas going down these 4 courses, and also ILX offer you an MPT bundle, which is probably well worth looking into. But that's by the by. There's no right answer, I'm afraid, here, folks. There's no right answer.
Yeah, and just to say with the MPT bundle, we've extended the license period. Normally our license periods are 12 months, but with this, because obviously there's more learning to undertake, we've extended that license period to 18 months. So it gives you plenty of time to get through your learning.
That's good.
Cool. Thank you both. That seems to be it for the questions. I know we've run over ever so slightly, but hopefully that's helped. Yes, that's it for me. And back over to you, Sally.
Yeah, well, just to say thank you very much, and I hope you've all found it informative, and any questions that you had arriving into this session, hopefully they've been answered. I'd like to thank Steve and also Alice, and wish you all a really good afternoon. Thanks very much. Bye, everybody.